Hello, my name's Keith Coble. I'm a professor of agricultural economics at Mississippi State University, and today we're talking about the Agricultural Act of 2014, our analysis and implementation of this legislation. The information today is for crop producers who are trying to understand the Agricultural Act of 2014, and so we'll walk you through several of the issues that are outstanding and talk about the choices that producers will have to make in the coming months. Let me begin by talking about Title I of the bill, the commodity programs. Major changes in policy here because of the elimination of the direct payment program, elimination of the countercyclical payment program, the acre program that began in the 2008 Farm Bill, and the SURE program. What is retained from the previous legislation are the marketing loan programs, which have existed for a number of years and remain essentially unchanged. There is a transition payment for cotton producers in 2014 that will ultimately give a fixed amount of payment to producers in 2014 because the new program for cotton will not be in place until 2015. The two big new programs that are created in this legislation are what we call ARC, Agricultural Risk Coverage, that is revenue triggered, price times yield, and the Price Loss Coverage Program, which looks very similar to the historical countercyclical payment program, and so would be more familiar to many of our producers. And we'll talk in more detail about both of those programs. Going on to talk about ARC and PLC, it is important to understand that producers are going to be given a one-time choice between ARC and PLC. And there are two versions of the ARC program, county and individual triggered. But the important thing to remember is that this will be a choice that producers get to make on a commodity by commodity basis. In other words, a producer can choose to participate in the ARC program for soybeans and the PLC program for rice. Both ARC and PLC will pay on decoupled base acres. They will not be tied to current planting. This is designed to minimize planting and market distortions and to comply with international trade agreements. The other important thing to note about these programs is that landowners are going to be given a one-time opportunity to reallocate their existing base acres from the commodity mix that they currently have to a commodity mix based on the 2009 to 2012 plantings. Producers are not required to make that change, but they have that as an option. And finally, conservation compliance is attached to all these commodities and crop insurance now. So let's talk a little bit more about the possible choices that a producer may face. First of all, let's talk about choices that the legislation says will be made by landowners. First of all, landowners will get the opportunity to convert their cotton base to generic base and participate in the Cotton Transition Program for 2014. Landowners will also get to choose to update their base yields if they wish to, and they will also have the opportunity to reallocate their base acres, as I just mentioned. Now, given those landowner choices, then producers, which in some cases are separate from landowners, will have the program choice for the life of the Farm Bill between county-triggered ARC program, a farm-triggered ARC program, or the PLC program. And ultimately, cotton has a unique situation in terms of farm programs. Cotton producers will have a choice between SCO and stacks on planted acres every year beginning in 2015. Now let's talk a little bit more about the generic base that I just mentioned. Generic base acres will be converted from cotton base acres. Because cotton cannot participate in the PLC and the ARC program, this cotton base is going to be reallocated to other commodities. PLC and ARC are allowed to move to other commodities for the crop year. So, in other words, if an individual has 100 acres of cotton base today, they will be able to convert it to generic base and then move it around for other base program crops that are in the PLC or ARC program over time. So it could be that in 2015, a producer has 100 acres of generic base, and they will apply it to soybean ARC payments, and then in the following year, they would opt to move that generic base to rice PLC payments. Let's talk a little bit more about base reallocation. As I mentioned earlier, it is a one-time opportunity to reallocate base acres from the covered commodities on the farm from 2009-2012. It will be in the proportion, if you choose to make this reallocation, it will be based on the proportion of the 4-year average of acres planted to those covered commodities from 2009 through 2012. The key thing that you need to understand about this is a producer will not be allowed to build base. So if a crop producer today has 500 acres of base across various commodities, they will still have 500 acres of base when this exercise is completed. It's simply a matter of, do you wish to alter the base to conform to a new crop mix if you so choose? The next slide talks about payment acres. Payment acres are the same for the county-triggered ARC program and the PLC program. The payment acres will equal 85% of the base acres of the covered commodity. Fairly straightforward calculation. One of the disincentives to participate in the farm-level ARC program is that it will only be paid on 65% of base acres. The other thing that I will note about the farm-level ARC program is that it is multiple crop triggered, which means the revenue from all commodities will be lumped together. Let me turn now in the next slide to a little bit more detail about the price loss coverage program, a program that, again, will function much like the counter-cyclical payment program of the past. Payments will equal 85% times the base acres times the base yield on the farm times the difference between the reference price and the maximum of the loan rate or the market year average price. Cotton is no longer eligible for a price-triggered program. And so for the commodities that do have PLC available, the reference price is a key number. So for corn, it's $3.70 a bushel. For long and medium grain rice, it's $14 per hundredweight. For soybeans, it's $8.40 per bushel. Peanuts, $535 per ton. Wheat, $5.50 per bushel, and sorghum, $3.95 per bushel. Another thing that I will point out about the price loss coverage program is that if you choose to participate in this program, you also are allowed to participate in the supplemental coverage option program offered by the Risk Management Agency. Now, let's talk a little bit about the ARC program on the next slide, which is an option relative to the PLC program. This program will begin in 2014. It can either be farm level or county triggered, and as I've mentioned already, if you choose the county triggered option, it will pay on 85% of your base acres, and the farm level version will pay on 65% of your acres. And again, let me remind you that farm level ARC will be based on all of the program crops in the farm. In general, our analysis suggests to us that many of our Mississippi producers will not be interested in the farm level ARC, but rather the county triggered program is likely to be more attractive. The other thing that I will mention about the ARC program is that payments cannot exceed 10% of the benchmark revenue. In effect, they cover they begin paying at 86% of expected revenue and will pay down to 76% of expected revenue. And I'll illustrate that more in just a moment. In the next slide, what you see is a graphic image that reflects the ARC program with crop insurance. ARC is what we call a shallow loss program. It is meant to supplement yield or revenue insurance, which would cover significant or deep losses. So in this example, we have illustrated a farm that has either yield or revenue insurance at the 75% coverage level. Then the ARC program would cover a range from 86% down to 76%. There's a little bit of a gap between the two, and also note that there's a co-payment on the ARC program of 15% when you're only paid on 85% of your base acres. Turning to the next slide, we can look at another example for ARC and crop insurance. An interesting thing about ARC is that a producer may choose to buy any level of crop insurance coverage available, and that it may even overlap with the ARC program. So in this example, we're illustrating the case where the farmer buys an 85% coverage policy and actually overlaps with the county-triggered ARC program. In the next slide, we illustrate the difference between ARC and SCO in combination with crop insurance, because SCO, the supplemental coverage option, may be revenue triggered like ARC, but it also, the lower limit of the SCO program will be coverage level of the individual crop insurance. So you don't have an overlap nor a gap between the shallow loss program and the deeper loss insurance programs. Now let's turn now and talk about implementation of these various programs. The timeline that we expect to see, and this is based on Undersecretary Scuse's testimony, is that this fall there will be an opportunity to update base yields and reallocate base acres. And by midwinter, all producers on a farm will be required to make a one-time, unanimous, and irrevocable election between PLC, county ARC, or individual ARC for the 2014-2018 year. Yes, that means that it may be early 2015 before one chooses which program to participate in for 2014. And later this year, we expect USDA to release a proposed definition of significant contribution of active personal management. And this has to do with the ability of producers and individuals to obtain a government payment. Talking about next about Title 11, the crop insurance title implementation. We have just seen the release of policy materials for the supplemental coverage option for wheat, and information for spring planted crops will be made later this summer or early fall. We expect to see the policy materials for stacks for cotton program will be made available in August. And RMA currently is stating that they expect stacks to be available on 98% of cotton acres. We also expect to have more information about the cotton transition payments later this summer. And for counties where stacks is not available in 2015, upland cotton producers will be eligible for an additional transition payment. What I want to turn to now in the next slide is the way we and others are evaluating these various options for producers. Given that these programs are now all triggered by either low prices, yields, or revenues, then a producer trying to evaluate a program decision will have to confront the fact that over the life of this farm bill, we're not sure what prices and yields will be. The way we evaluate these decisions is using computer simulation models that model crop price and yields, and we don't know what prices will be, but we do know based on historical data, estimates of the variability of price and what are the odds that prices will change a little bit or significantly from where they are the current levels. On yields, we're able to look at the historical data and identify yield trends. We know the distribution of weather and other factors so that we can project the possibility of various yield outcomes. And so our models predict a average yield in most scenarios. Extremely good yields are less likely, as are extremely bad yields. We put all this information together in a computer to look at literally thousands of scenarios for the next 5 years in the life of the Farm Bill. The results I'm going to show today are for soybeans. And we see that a very similar pattern. We look at the price loss coverage program, SCO, and the county triggered ARC program. In all cases, the average payment over the 5-year life of the bill is higher for the county ARC program than it is for either PLC or SCO, even though we could add those two programs together. So in general, based on current price levels and price variability expectations, we see a lot of reason to suggest that we expect producers will take soybean ARC program rather than the PLC program. The next slide shows you something that I want to point out, though, and that may help you sleep a little better at night, is that when we look at the percent of expected revenue these payments will reflect, we see that even in the most extreme case, Crop Reporting District 40 here in Mississippi, The expected payments for soybeans reflect barely more than 2% of expected revenue, not a significant portion of the revenue that producers would expect to receive from growing soybeans. The next slide points out something that I think is very important to note as well, and that is that the ARC program has an Olympic average of historical prices and yields that drive it. As many producers will know, corn and soybean prices have been extremely high the last few years and now have declined to lower levels. Because of that, our expectation is that in many cases, the payments for an ARC program will be much higher in 2014 and 2015 than they will be in the later years. And so as you look at our results for our county-triggered ARC program, or PLC and SCO, the Olympic average of the ARC program results in much higher payments in 2014 and 2015, and then the two programs really approximate each other in the last 3 years of the program. The next slide shows our simulations of the estimated soybean ARC versus PLC payments for counties around the country. And you see, for the most part, in central and northern Iowa, for example, the ARC program is expected to pay from $13 to $19 more than PLC. In Mississippi, we have a few instances like that, but the difference tends to be smaller in most of North Mississippi, only a $5 to $10 difference per acre per year. These are some indication of the robustness of the results that we have so far. The next slide shows a more interesting scenario, I think, for corn, and here we have used two different starting prices for corn, one at $4.60 and the other at $3.90. We see a similar pattern as we saw before, and that is that corn ARC payments are quite high in the early years, but they drop off significantly in the out years, while the PLC expected payments actually slightly increase in each year of the Farm Bill. The bottom line is that there are scenarios where corn PLC payments would exceed the ARC payments in out years. And you also can see from this slide that there is a pretty significant difference in where we start the program in terms of expected price levels. So the story changes quite a bit when we go from a starting price of $3.90 or $4.60. Let me talk a little bit more about Title 11, the crop insurance title. We have the two new shallow loss programs called the Supplemental Coverage Option and the Stacked Income Protection Program. Both of these will function in very much the same manner. Note also that this piece of legislation mandates conservation compliance for crop insurance, which did not exist in recent years. There are also several changes to the traditional crop insurance program included in this bill. The first one is that it allows enterprise units to be broken out by dry land versus irrigated practices. That has not been permissible in the past. It also allows one coverage level for irrigated land and a different coverage level for dry land. Note also that beginning farmers are provided a 10 percentage point discount on all crop insurance premiums. The bill provides authority to do peanut revenue insurance and provides for numerous studies and pilot programs, including catfish margin insurance. Let me talk a little bit more about the Stacked Income Protection Plan because it is a key part of the safety net for cotton producers. This is a program that will be delivered by RMA in 2015. It is only for cotton. It has an 80% premium subsidy and no payment limits on the premium subsidy. This program is really a modified version of the county-level GRIP program that has been around but not widely purchased by producers. In effect, what this legislation is allowing is for an individual to layer individual coverage for deep losses and area-triggered coverage for shallower losses. The expected revenue for stacks is the maximum of the county trend yield or a 5-year Olympic average yield times the higher of the crop insurance base price. Actual revenue will be county yield times the crop insurance harvest price. The maximum coverage is 86% with a 14% deductible. The maximum range of payment then will be from the top end of the insurance coverage down to 70% of expected revenue. You do not have to purchase individual coverage insurance with the STAX program, but you need to recognize that you would be exposed to deep losses if you chose to do that. And also, if you are in the STAX program, you're not eligible to purchase SCO on the same land. The next slide shows the subsidy schedule as defined by law for crop insurance. You see that the table has various rows reflecting different coverage levels, and then columns reflecting base and optional unit subsidies, enterprise unit subsidies, the SCO, and the STAX subsidy. We see that enterprise unit subsidies are much higher than basic and optional unit throughout, but especially at the lower coverage levels, and that the STAX subsidy percentage is higher than the SCO subsidy percentage. So this is the amount that by which the actuarially fair rate, as determined by the risk management agency, is reduced in the calculation of what the producer pays. Let me show you a few slides that illustrate where we're at in terms of crop insurance coverage in the United States. The first slide shows the 2013 wheat average coverage levels. You see the counties that are shaded red have very low coverage levels, and the bright dark green have high coverage levels. So here again we see fairly low crop insurance coverage levels on wheat in the south, and higher levels particularly in the Pacific Northwest and the Eastern Corn Belt. For corn, there's a very stark result that almost all of what we would traditionally call the Corn Belt has crop insurance coverage levels for corn that are above 75% coverage. In the South, on the other hand, we see many counties where the average coverage level is between 50 and 65, which reflects a lot of catastrophic coverage protection. The pattern for soybeans is quite similar, very high coverage levels in the Corn Belt and relatively lower coverage levels in the Southeast. The next slide shows some analysis of where we looked at whether, because of ARC or SCO, producers would be interested in backing off and buying a lower level of individual level crop insurance. These simulations maximize the producer's benefits, and ultimately we see very little reduction in coverage levels induced by the presence of ARC and SCO. Our analysis suggests that producers are probably not going to back off crop insurance coverage very much because of these shallow loss programs. So let me wrap up with what I will call the easy calls for most producers. And I think, first of all, the conversion of cotton base to generic base is in many cases going to be a very attractive option, and certainly producers should take a look at that. The yield updates should be evaluated, and I think given the strong trends in yields that we have in many crops, most producers would likely choose to update their yields. The third point is the farm level ARC is probably not going to fit our region very well because we have quite diversified farms. It is much more likely to work well in a monoculture region, perhaps wheat in a plain state. And that in many instances the STAC program will be preferred to the SCO program unless the individual really wants a low level of crop insurance coverage. Some important things for people to remember about this program is, number one, area trigger programs may not trigger when you have a loss. So if this program is triggered based on a county yield and your yield tends to not follow well with the county yield, this is a potential problem. It will result in the possibility that you get paid when you didn't need it, or you don't get paid when you did need it. Also remember that the Title I programs will be paid on base acres and not planted acres. Therefore, you could be growing soybeans and getting a rice PLC payment. That is entirely appropriate here. So the decoupling creates some interesting decisions, and we would largely break it down in this manner. So when the opportunity is given producers to sign up for these programs, remember that you will be making a one-time decision at that point about which program you prefer, but afterwards you will not be restricted in terms of what crops you plant if the market is telling you in 2015 plant a different crop. The other thing is that I think producers need to talk to their lenders and help them understand that unlike direct payments, there will not be an inflow of government program benefits every year, and that most of the models and results that we have suggest that ARC, PLC, and SCO are probably going to pay on average a little less than 50% of the time. Finally, I want to talk about decision aids a little bit. We already have 2 spreadsheet decision aids available to help farmers with the base acre and the base yield calculations. Those are available from the MSU Cares website, the Farm Bill support tools. We're going to continue to do representative farm analysis to kind of allow producers to see what the simulation models are suggesting will be the payouts of these various programs. I'd also note that USDA is given some funding in the Farm Bill to support decision aids. 2 teams have been approved by USDA, and we are collaborating with one of those teams, the Ag and Food Policy Center at Texas A&M, along with the FAPRI team at the University of Missouri. So we will be working on decision aids and be putting out new information as there are developments. There are several of us that work on farm policy at the Ag Econ department at Mississippi State University. You can contact Keith Coble, Larry Faulkner at the Delta Station, Barry Barnett, or John Michael Riley. Thank you for the opportunity to present this information.